Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
And yes, as the voice of the great Race Hobbs says, this is your intrepid host, Peter Robbins, and the show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. If you are watching or listening, you are doing so at the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Center, which is website KGRA-DB for digitalbroadcasting.com. Subscribe to KGRA-DB and use my name, PETER, as your subscription code, and you will receive a full 30% off. That's right. You didn't mishear me, 30%. And so we dispense with the business part of the show. This for me is a special show in that 2 weeks ago, I had the great experience of getting the hell out of the house and going somewhere to Texas. And in southern Texas, about 20 minutes from the Mexican border, there is a wonderful city called Edinburgh. And this year they marked their 10th UFO festival and conference. It's rooted in an actual UFO crash that occurred in the area. And in fact, that I and the other speakers and many of our guests at the conference went out to on the Thursday and were walked out to the actual location where it happened. I had been vaguely aware of it. What I was not prepared for was the warmth and the thoughtfulness and the kindness, not just of the people of Edinburgh, but of the employees of the city, who are the people that put this event together. I don't think an hour passed, except when I was sleeping, when somebody attached to the event didn't come up to me and ask me if I needed anything, another bottle of water, whatever it was. And that kindness extended to the folks at the Holiday Inn Express Hotel. Not the fanciest hotel in the world, but one I would be glad to stay at again anytime because of their kindness and their thoughtfulness and their attentiveness. With that said, we have four guests today. One who will be joining us mid-program and one who will be leaving us into the second hour. They are my dear friend and close colleague, Noe Torres, who is a recognized expert in the field of UFOs and the paranormal. Noe is the author, publisher, and former Texas State Section Director for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. He holds a bachelor's in English and a master's in library science from the University of Texas at Austin. I should also say Noe is a librarian. For me, one of my favorite, most highly regarded professions in the world at the high school in Edinburgh, and I have particular admiration for that about him. Noe has written one of the most popular books about the famous Roswell incident, titled The Ultimate Guide to the Roswell UFO Crash, which, if you ever visit Roswell, is absolutely must reading. It is, and I can say with experience, the very best book of its kind to get you around, show you all of the historic locations, and bring you a higher awareness of where you are and what went on there. And yes, which is among the top best-selling books at the gift shops at the Roswell, New Mexico UFO Museum and in other locations. Torres also co-wrote with Roswell, New Mexico historian John LeMay, the critically acclaimed book, The Real Cowboys and Aliens, UFO Encounters of the Old West. That was published in 2011. It was followed by a series of books on the same theme: The Real Cowboys and Aliens, Early American UFOs, The Real Cowboys and Aliens, Old West UFOs, The Real Cowboys and Aliens, The Coming of the Airships, and The Real Cowboys and Aliens, The Lost Cases, 20th Century, which I just finished reading and highly recommend. His latest book, published in January, is Early 20th Century UFOs and UFOs in the Roaring Twenties. In addition, Noe has authored or co-authored a number of other well-reviewed books, including Mexico's Roswell, The Other Roswell, Aliens in the Forest, Fallen Angel, and the Khmer Incident. His books are available from his website, which is roswellbooks.com. Torres has appeared on a number of nationally broadcast television shows, including Season 2, Episode 1 of the Travel Channel's Mysteries of the Outdoors, titled Strange Attraction, which premiered in August of 2017. In that show, he is interviewed extensively about unexplained mysteries in Big Bend National Park. Also that year, Noe was featured in an episode titled The Marfa Lights for the TV series Mysteries of the Unexplained. In 2008, he appeared in the History Channel's UFO Hunters in a show called Crash and Retrieval. Continuing on. In addition, Noe founded a number of UFO conferences throughout Texas, including the Laredo UFO Conference, the Del Rio UFO Festival, the Presidio UFO Festival, the Edinburgh UFO Conference and Festival, which was recently ranked by listverse.com as the number 3 UFO festival in the world. His efforts to organize UFO conferences in Texas were spotlighted by Texas Observer magazine. Jane Kyle, aka UFOJane, has documented over 1,000 UFO sightings in her home state of Texas and counting. Even after all these years of research, thought, she has more questions than ever and loves interviewing UFO experts and witnesses on her YouTube channel. Jane has been featured in local and international media, including the Austin American-Statesman, San Antonio Express News, Fox 7 Austin, the UK's Daily Express News, The CW Show, Mysteries Decoded, and most recently in the Discovery Plus documentary, Roswell, The Final Verdict. Jane has a journalism degree from the University of Texas at Austin and lives with her family in New Braunfels, Texas. Third guest is N.K. Kranda, who also lives in Texas. She went to school for horticulture sciences and graduated with highest honors. She then continued her education in the field of psychology, post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma therapies, art, biology, physics, history, and shamanism. She currently works in experiencer research and preservation and has had the privilege of interviewing some of the most remarkable and memorable people in the field. Her interest in contactees and experiencers began when she volunteered as a MUFON chapter secretary in San Antonio, and after writing way too many reports, she found her true interests were in the people that quietly came to meetings and told incredible stories about their experiences. In her work, she teaches them to fight the stigma often associated with the subject, to never stop telling their stories, and to honor themselves for having survived. Our fourth guest, who will be joining us later in the show, is Daniel Allen Jones. He is an investigative journalist, an amateur anthropologist, as well as a history, nature, and wildlife enthusiast. Daniel is the host and producer for The Vortex, a show that explores the mysteries of the world and beyond. Daniel has been researching unexplained phenomena for over a decade and has investigated strange sights, conducted numerous interviews, and provided media coverage for special events. He is also a musician and teaches drums around the DFW area. That's Dallas-Fort Worth. His new book, Aurora, chronicles over a century of history about UFO sightings and alien encounters going back to a Texas legend from 1897. Noe, Jane, NK, welcome to Meanwhile here on Earth.
Thank
Hello,
you.
Peter.
Am I the only one hearing static?
I don't hear any static.
No, it must
Okay.
be just.
I'm gonna leave and come back. So Jane, you do your thing.
Bye. Hi, you guys.
I wish that you could read my bio for everything going forward. I could just record that and play that, before, because you just have such a great voice.
Thank you. Even when I stumble over my words.
Don't even notice it.
It's such a pleasure to see both you again. Jane, you and I had a pre-existing online relationship, but Noe and I go back to, I think, 2007, when we
That's
first
correct.
met and became friends in Roswell, New Mexico. Where else? And although we haven't seen each other a lot over the intervening years, I do consider him a dear friend and very close colleague in this wonderful field. And it looks like NK is back. And there she is again. Welcome back.
Hello.
And NK, it was wonderful seeing you again also in this amazing event in Edinburgh. Noe, you are a founder of the Edinburgh UFO Festival and Conference. I thought it was spectacularly successful. And I say that as somebody who has worked with or worked for or spoken at the UFO festivals in Roswell, in McMinnville, Oregon, in Pine Bush, New York, and in one or two other places as well as this one in Texas. It's right up there with the best of them, but it's infused with something very unique, namely that the general population of the Edinburgh, Texas area is 90% plus Mexican and Mexican American, which was something I was particularly looking forward to experiencing, in that I've traveled a lot in my life, but I've never been to Mexico. So this was a doubly special experience for me. Can you tell us a little bit about the origins of the festival? How did it get started?
Well, Peter, that's an interesting question. And you mentioned that we first met in Roswell in 2007, and that was actually unbeknownst to you and also really not known to me at the time either. That would form the beginnings of the Edinburgh UFO Conference. Because over the years, and I spoke at the Roswell UFO Museum, as you know, for several years in a row, 5 years in a row, as a matter of fact. So from 2007 to 2012, roughly, I was there every year, soaking in this amazing festival that the city of Roswell puts on annually in July, every July. So in my mind began to form this concept of transporting what I saw in Roswell to my home here in South Texas. I knew that there was some interest down here in the topic, and I had spoken at local public libraries about my UFO research and my books. So just over time, that the concepts that I tell people that have interviewed me about how it all began, I tell them I stole all the ideas from Roswell. I mean, they were doing it beautifully. As you know, you were involved in it. You worked for the city and organizing it for a while. So why try to reinvent everything? I just took what I saw in Roswell and I simply transported it here to South Texas on a very small scale to begin with. And over the past 10 years, it has grown immensely, as you saw. And I probably would have been somewhat embarrassed to have you come down in the early years of this festival. But now I feel that we've reached a level of respectability in relation to the Roswell event. So that's basically how it happened.
Jane, when did you first become aware of the Edinburgh Festival and get involved and start going?
So it wasn't, I had never been involved until Noe reached out to me shortly before the event. And I was really excited to hear from him because I'd known Noe's name and who he was for a long time. And I'd known the name of the Edinburgh UFO Festival. And we just always, whenever we'd look at where it was in Texas, we're like, oh, well, that's, it's too long of a drive. We can't do it this year. And so it would just pass by every year. I never got to go. So we just knew it was time to finally go check it out and see what it was all about. And it was the best time. It was the best weekend. And NK, who it was, I guess NK and Ken, I guess I had also met Daniel at one point. But for the most part, everybody I was meeting was the first time meeting them and getting to know them, and it was in person at least. And so it was really like, especially, and I know I'm not the only one too who hasn't been to an event probably in a while. Like there just aren't many opportunities lately. And so it was just a long time coming, and it was just extra special though because of the people and the humans involved.
Yeah.
So yeah, sure, UFOs, aliens, interesting. Of course, all the presentations were so fascinating, but it was really just the people that attended and the actual people that spoke, not necessarily what they talked about, that made it so great. So it was awesome.
NK, this was your first visit to the festival and the conference as well, and you brought your two young daughters. What was that experience like?
Thank you for the 1-day notice. And thank you for allowing my daughters to tear apart your hotel room and go to the pool. That was very nice of you. But it was incredible, and I was so completely honored by Mr. Noe when we had talked and he had asked me to speak and to give a small introduction for myself. But at the same time, I didn't really want to take the moment away from Peter, because it was his moment and it was his speech and he was the headliner. And so I tried to do it as quickly as possible. And for those of you that don't know, Peter has like a 17-page biography, not including the film and music notations. So I said, Peter, what do you want me to say about you? And he was like, well, and then Mr. Noe came and asked him a question. So he turned away from me and I'm just like, oh my God, I don't even know what to say. So not only was I put on the spot for this spontaneous talk about me and my preservation work and everything that I do, and that honor yourself and you survive and you're going to be okay, but also juice Peter M.F. Robbins. So that was great. So I made notes. It was perfect. I planned to just be short and sweet and to the point. And for whatever reason, my brain was on par with this. We were at the mic. We were saying, okay, we're ready. Don't be too long. And then my body said, we're going to go for a walk away from all of your notes, and we're not going to take anything with us, and everything's going to come from the heart. And I was like, oh no. But Peter knows that elevator joke, and for the people that haven't heard it, one of the first pieces of advice that Peter ever gave me as my mentor was, stay away from people that are in it only for the money. Stay away from people that have something to prove. And for the love of God, don't get stuck in an elevator with them. So that was my introduction to Peter Robbins. That was it. That's all he got. He had nothing to stand on. There were no accolades. It was just, hey, this is my mentor, and here's a funny joke. Here you go, Peter.
You did great. One thing for me that makes events that are a UFO festival / conference unique is, if they're well done, they are, and I mean this in the most flattering, best sense of the word, completely schizophrenic. That there is an event that is a festival, over the top in many cases, and Edinburgh certainly qualified for that. It was not unlike McMinnville or Pine Bush or Exeter, New Hampshire UFO Festival and Conference, one that I'm proud to have co-founded, or Lord knows Roswell. This one was infused quite naturally with a certain aspect of Mexican and Mexican American culture. And the costumes were one step beyond, in some cases, the costumes that I normally associate with these events. And it's just fun. The first one of these kind of events that I ever did was the one in McMinnville, Oregon. And I was hesitant. I thought of myself as a serious person in the work, and the word festival didn't integrate very well. The other better known, certainly, ufologist that was speaking that year was the late, great Stanton T. Friedman, one of my mentors and dear friends. And he also was somewhat equivocal about associating his name with the festival. And in McMinnville, one of the things that they do is they have a parade. And it's different than the Roswell parade in that the speakers are chauffeured in vintage cars. We sit in the back and we throw candy and souvenirs to the peasants, and we wave like the Queen of England. And I could not stop laughing. I mean, it's basically 10,000 people lining the street for a mile or so, with dogs, wrapped in aluminum foil with antenna, and children with their faces painted green. My face hurt from laughing so hard. But I realized something very important. There was nothing about that festival, or really any of these festivals, that was mocking, condescending, or dismissive about the subject. More, they were kind of celebrating how deeply the subject of UFOs, and for lack of a better word, aliens, had integrated themselves into popular culture and kind of common knowledge. The other half of it, either integrated into the festival or on a separate day like Edinburgh, is a conference, a serious, well-organized conference. So it was just wonderful to have that reality affirmed for me. And I'd come back in a minute anytime I was invited. Please consider me an ongoing unpaid consultant, Noe, and anything that I can do to, help you with this event, let me know. Jane, your impressions of just being there and, what it felt like as far as the festival part?
Yeah, so I've been lucky enough to go to a bunch of alien cons, and then I think a few local events here in Texas, and just other things in life, right, for outside of UFOs. And I thought this was very impressive to me. That whole family friendly day, all the smiling kids, it's something that I see missing from a lot of UFO events. And
Sure.
it's not that the kids aren't there, but they're bored, right? Like all the shopping is just like they only want to buy so many crystals, right? Like, so, but this was a hit for kids, like, and it makes their parents have a great day too, and then they're much more likely to listen when Noe gets up there on stage and talks about this UFO incident that happened in their own hometown. It makes it hit home, literally. And then the second day, which was more serious, but also really funny too. Everybody, including NK, and her short but brief intro was really entertaining. There was plenty of laughs that day too, but really getting into the actual UFO research and cases that this whole event is about. That part was just incredible too. It was such a great lineup, and everybody did so great. So, I'm never gonna regret, I think, usually hanging out with people in person, talking about UFOs and stuff, but I don't think I had an expectation that it would be so entertaining and so fun and so well thought out, and it exceeded my expectations. And then also too, just the hotel and everybody who worked at the event and were so nice and accommodating, and town,
Orlando, the manager, was amazing. Because my engineering kids started taking apart the pool deck for fun to make a sandcastle, and I was like, oh my god, I'm so sorry. And he literally came out and with her rebuilt the bricks in the pool deck and didn't make a big deal out of it. He's like, you made such a good puzzle. So Orlando, just 5 stars.
Shout out.
Noe, did you, as a business question, did the city contract the Holiday Inn Express because basically they got, the best bid for services provided? Because again, this is not a hotel that's associated, like with the Hiltons or, the more upscale ones. But
No.
I just can't say enough positive things about the way all of us who were in one way or another associated with the festival or the conference were treated at that hotel.
Well, we've used them for a number of years running. They're a member of the Chamber of Commerce.
Ah.
Chamber of Commerce is involved in staging the UFO festival and conference. So, but we have, used a couple of other properties, but the out of town guests have really enjoyed the Holiday Inn Express, and I think it started about 5 or 6 years ago, and we've stuck with it because they are so good. They're so welcoming of our conference and our guest speakers, and really, Edinburgh is a college town. I don't know if you all are fully cognizant of that. We have the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley based in Edinburgh, the main campus, and so we don't have really long established luxurious hotel properties. So the hotel that you all stayed in is basically as good as it gets in Edinburgh. Most of our hotels are part of chains, well-known chains, and they appeal mainly to the visitors we get for the university events. But this is a really good property where we've been very happy, and we've heard nothing but positives from
Mr.
all
Noe,
of our guests.
any hotel that lets my child take apart their pool deck, and we were allowed to have a gigantic pool float, and we were allowed to have a gigantic umbrella because there was no shade. Yeah, this hotel went up and beyond. You did very well, sir, and I suggest that you contract them in the future.
I have to say, I did something, I don't remember the last time I did anything like, which was send an email letter to Holiday Inn telling them about my experience. It's just not the way I usually think, but they really were above and beyond. A question I'd like to put to you all is, we take the subject of truly anomalous UFOs seriously, and I'm kind of focusing in here not so much on kind of Vallée or John Keel rooted ideas, although they're very valid in their own ways, as far as interdimensional or other non-hard metal explanations for this phenomena. I think it's a big tent, and there is room for all of these things in reality. But still, we live in a world where we're coming out of a deep conditioning that was instilled in the public in mind in 1947, that it's nonsense. And so in establishing events like this in different communities, which are very rightfully entitled to them by their history and association with the subject, one often finds initial resistance in the community at large, or the business community. I've seen it first in McMinnville, where, well, should we do this or shouldn't we do this? And it was an event that is now phenomenally successful, and more so each year. I think it's now into about its 20th year, that was established by the business community, which there is one particular company called McMinimans, no relationship to McMinnville, that buys up old historic properties, renovates them, and turns them into inns, hotels, bed and breakfasts, resorts, etc., with a historic aspect to them. And they have or had historians on their staff who discovered this event, the Trent sighting in 1950, May of 1950. And they built the event around that. And each year, resistance in the business community became less and less because it was a very good business week. Same thing in Roswell, where there is still are they making fun of us, or is this something we should be proud of and celebrate? In more conservative Exeter, New Hampshire, it was the same thing again. Exeter is doubly entitled because of the incident at Exeter and because of the Betty and Barney Hill event just up the road, their abduction in 1961. And at first, there was a lot of reticence in the business community. And now, although like all these events, it's been on hold for 2 years, we will be going ahead this coming Labor Day weekend. It is the best business week for the business community, including Christmas. And whether or not they take the subject seriously, they are fully behind it. So I'm wondering first, Noe, did you experience initial resistance in the business community, or was it basically accepted and let's see how it goes?
Well, that's interesting, Peter. An interesting question. As you know, I've been all over the United States speaking about the topic. And then suddenly, as people in my own community found out that I was doing this, I started getting a lot of invitations to speak locally. And we were just starting up our small group, MUFON group here, with about 10 or 12 members originally. And suddenly I realized there was a high level of interest among the Hispanic community of South Texas, something which, I had suspected, but I didn't have a way to previously to poll and find out more about, because all of the conferences and all of the events that I was being invited to were far away from here. So as we started giving presentations and talks here in the area, I realized, and this interest, of course, ended up being the basis for the foundation of the conference here in Edinburgh. But the Latino culture is very, very strongly rooted in spirituality.
Yes.
And we have the legends of the Aztecs and the Mayas. We have thousands of major UFO sightings in Mexico and South America.
Yeah.
And it's always been a hot spot. And it's always been an important part of Latino culture. The concept of these beings from the stars that have come down to Earth and have helped to direct humanity. It's in the culture. And down here in South Texas and in other Hispanic areas, you don't get the skepticism that you see in other parts of North America. Here you have much more acceptance. And everybody I talk to, my wife at one point was calling me the Pope of UFOs, because people would line up to talk to me after my lectures. I would have a presentation here at one of our local public libraries, and there would be 50, 60 people in a line to talk to me about their own UFO experiences.
Oh, wonderful.
So, when I shared all of this with our library director here in Edinburgh, and she was instrumental in convincing the city to launch the very first festival conference back in 2012. So
outstanding.
Yeah, no, there has been absolutely no resistance. The local government have been 100% supportive. We've had the mayor of the city speak about the UFO conference at his annual address, which he gives on the state of the city every year. We've had the mayor show up in person, as you all experienced. Jane, I think you interacted with him at the festival. We had the mayor show up.
I've Glurp the alien.
Yeah. So, I mean, absolutely zero resistance. And the contrary of that, 100% support from the beginning, from 2012 to now.
NK, kind of a multiple question. Your thoughts about this confluence of a UFO festival mixed with a UFO conference, your experience of it, and you've spoken at one of the most major UFO conferences annually in America, the UFO MegaCon, which has a decidedly different kind of audience. Can you kind of compare and contrast the audiences between Nevada and Texas that you addressed, and just a general feel of these events.
Absolutely. And I can also connect it to Los Angeles, because Ryan Sprague and I also, along with Earl Grey Anderson, were at LA Alien Con 2019. So I really think that this, even though it's not the biggest UFO conference I've ever been to, even though it's not the most jam-packed with programs and activities and everything else, it was a wonderful opportunity for the people of Edinburgh to show you real Texas genuine hospitality.
Yes.
And just how kind these people are and how much they want to help you. And I got very emotional with a couple of experiencers. I was working Peter's booth while he was doing his stuff, and I was trying to sell his DVDs, and just the people that would talk to me. Some very kind gentlemen gave us copper coins. Another gentleman that was about 80 years old had a tinfoil hat that was about 3 feet long. And it made me so happy. I was like, I just want a picture with you. Can I please just have a picture with you? And he was a gentleman in a wheelchair. And it made my whole day. Edinburgh is really the epitome of the hometown experience of, I want to see the best of the best, but I don't want to deal with Las Vegas. I don't want to deal with Los Angeles. Yeah, definitely go to Edinburgh. I had fun.
Jane, your thoughts on the same thing?
Well, it's amazing that you can live in a state your whole life, be born and raised in it, and never go to a certain section of it. I never go to South Texas. I've done the Mexico thing, via a plane, and I know West Texas, East Texas, maybe not, maybe North Texas,
It's a big state.
The other dark spot for me. But yeah, so for me, it was just, I really, really loved the area. And I kept talking to my husband. I was like, well, I guess if we want to like buy some other property, like maybe, one day, maybe South Texas would be the place. I totally fell in love. There's a really great energy there. And it's not even something you can really put into words. You just kind of know it.
And we don't have the huge real estate prices down here either, Jane. So
yeah, man, it's bad here.
Drive them up, Jane. Drive them up.
Honestly, we have very high temperatures for a large part of the year. So a lot of people don't see us as a prime location for relocating. But hey, if you're indoors in the air conditioning most of the time, the temperatures in the 90s in the summer don't really bother you that much,
It's just the 115 in the shade that gets you.
In Phoenix, yeah.
No, here too.
We don't get the humidity that the Houston area.
Oh, it's a dry heat. Okay, Mr. Noe.
We're far from the coast.
There's a difference.
Peter, I wanted to mention just adding on to what we were saying about the origins of this is we did conferences, as you mentioned in the intro, in other parts of the state, and some of them lasted 4 or 5 years. And then we picked these locations because there had been, in our opinion, significant UFO events in those places. Like, for example, we started up a conference in Del Rio, Texas, which is southwest of San Antonio. Okay. And we had that event for 4 or 5 years before the local Air Force Base killed it by working behind the scenes through the Chamber of Commerce to remove funding.
Oh my goodness.
But there was a significant event in the Del Rio area in the 1950s involving a gentleman named Robert Willingham, who chased a UFO in his F-86 fighter jet. And then we also had a conference in Presidio, Texas, which was related to the book that Ruben Uriarte and I did, Mexico's Roswell, about a crash between a UFO and a small plane in 1974, just outside of Presidio, Texas. So we did that one for about 3 years, and then the townspeople have such a small infrastructure. It's almost like when we did our conference in Aurora, Texas for 1 year. and the town just doesn't have the resources to support.
Yes.
But really, Edinburgh, right from the beginning, took off, and it's been fantastic. But the other events went strong for a few years, and then people lost interest, or they pulled back funding. So that's another interesting aspect of this.
Noe, if I may, going back to the Laredo event that the Air Force, in its own way, killed off behind the scenes, do you feel that was rooted in, well, a fear of ridicule, embarrassment, or drawing attention to a real event that the
We
Air
had
Force was not interested in having broadcast?
Yeah, we had, okay, so the Del Rio, Texas
Del
event,
Rio.
we had, it was managed by a council that included, it was primarily members of the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce. And one of the members was a representative from the local Air Force Base, Laughlin Air Force Base in Del Rio. And this gentleman was something else. I don't want to be hit with a libel lawsuit, but so I'm not going to go into details, but he was from the beginning opposed. He said UFOs are a bunch of nonsense. Why is the city putting money into this event? The Air Force has proven that there's no such things as UFOs, and he just started working to kill it. And eventually, over time, he pulled some stunts with the city that eventually caused the funding to be pulled. And I could tell that the other folks in Del Rio really wanted it to continue, but it didn't. So yeah, that was a definite effort to undermine, the event.
Now, in the world of UFO studies, which is in kind of a golden age right now, in that with all of the exchanges of information that are moving at lightning speed because of this phenomena called the internet, because we are in a moment of historic transition with kind of, I won't say it was responsible for, but it kind of signaled a change in the weather. In December of 2017, a pair of articles by three distinguished journalists appeared in the New York Times, and it kind of marked a media transition from wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I'm just reading this, folks, I don't believe it, or that compulsion to dismiss it as nonsense, to there is something here. Now we see it emerging, I think most interestingly, in a pragmatic way in Congress, where you have on the progressive front people like one of my Congress representatives, Kirsten Gillibrand, putting forward a brilliantly proposed mega statement and proposal to take the subject seriously and enculturate it into political thinking. And then on the right, the Florida Senator, Marco Rubio, ideologically at opposite ends of the polls, who are shoulder to shoulder on this issue, reflected in the media, where the serious coverage on Fox is reflected on CNBC. That understood, how can I say, we are at a changing point, in the weather of this subject. And a festival / conference gives an opportunity to bring the kids, have a fun experience, kind of de-anxiety eyes the events and the possibilities a bit, and then to follow up or incorporate with actual, well, documented lectures by recognized people in the field, which I think is serving to expand our base. And I think what it's all about, in a way, is getting to the point where we have a critical mass in the American public, and by extension, the Western world, so to say, who takes the subject seriously enough that we will reach a tipping point and things will change. And perhaps we will see, as a result, something approaching the term put forward as disclosure. Your thoughts on that, Jane, first?
Yeah, so we're definitely not at that tipping point yet, but yeah, it definitely seems like we're approaching it, right? I mean, we've seen this happen to other topics that, nobody knew anything before, and then now everybody's an expert and is practicing it every day and all that. So I am expecting that to happen with UFOs. Maybe it's a big actual event, like where the aliens reveal themselves, or maybe it's a political speech. We're definitely not there. And sometimes I think we're getting close, and then I'm like, wait, I'm living in a different universe than most people. I did an interview recently with a local news station in Austin, and the reporter was great. But she texted afterward, how do you pronounce ufologist? And it's like, that's not in her vocabulary. That's not an
great.
everyday word that she hears. And so it turns out she was
Interesting.
right with how she thought it was pronounced. But that just shows you, like, this is still not an everyday thing for most people. So we're still really far. And I think, am I a little deluded sometimes to think we're getting there? But I do think we're getting there slowly but surely.
For me, before turning it over to Noe and NK, that tipping point is defined by a critical mass. For years, I had the privilege of working as a theater manager in Off-Broadway, a nonprofit, wonderful repertory company. And for a lot of our time, we had a 210-person state-of-the-art theater. If we were doing a revival of an old comedy and that theater was packed, I would be out in the hallway doing house manager things, temperature, fire doors and all that. And I would hear a sound coming from the theater that made me want to open the door and see what was going on. It was the sound of 210 people laughing so hard they were losing their breath. It's a marvelous sound. If it was a cold, rainy night in the middle of the week and there were 59 people in the theater, the exact same scene was playing. It was just as funny. There'd be much more modest laughter. And I don't mean because of the size of the ratio of the audience. It was that feeling of, I need to feel that I am completely surrounded by like-minded people to be comfortable enough to express how I feel. And I think for the four of us and people who are our colleagues and friends in the work, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that we are still a very modest minority, no matter how it seems to us, because we live in this world of people in general who are actually spending their lives focused on other things, paying their bills, raising healthy kids, hoping they don't get sick, etc. We are too, but we do have this attitude of, I'm ready, why isn't everybody else? NK, your thoughts on that?
I think that it's pretty straightforward, and I even brought this up in a debate with Mr. Luis Elizondo, is that just because ufology and aliens and abduction have become mainstream, it doesn't mean that the stigma is gone. And basically, he was running with this whole Jurassic Park concept of, we never stopped to think about what would happen if we could. We only stopped to think about how should we. And he was very honest. He was a very kind man, and I enjoyed my debate with him, especially because he was honest. And he said, we really don't. We have no plan for disclosure. We have no plan for the medical and psychological needs of all these experiencers, let alone the regular citizens that were not prepared for this and knew nothing about it. And he fully intends to retire after all of these documents come out. And I said, Mr. Luis Elizondo, I really hope that you're with us on the team on this, because we have no plan for the long term of helping these people process this information, which for you and I is day to day, and for Jane and Noe is day to day. But, for a normal civilian that's working under the stress of a pandemic, or being a single parent, or working minimum wage, or not having health insurance, UFOs are a bit much. You might want someone to talk to. I suggest it.
Noe, I've been thinking about what you said about part of the tradition and history and kind of lineage of beliefs passed on generation to generation in the Latino Hispanic community. Mexico, South America, Central America, that simply makes this general subject more natural to incorporate. Several years ago, I had the amazing experience of speaking at a conference in southern Brazil, a culture that was completely alien to me. I flew in with Richard Dolan, a friend and colleague, and we roomed together. And our first meal was on the Thursday that we arrived. We went out to a buffet. It happened to be Thanksgiving for us, but the regular Thursday for folks in southern Brazil. And one of the first things we observed, not that I didn't know about it already, was in Brazil, yeah, there's certainly some kind of level of endemic racism, but it's blown off the charts in that compared to, say, the United States, within one family, you can have people of every color, skin color, hair color, nationality, nationality background imaginable. And seeing these long tables of families with, at the same table, people as Black as a Nigerian African to a Northern Italian or, light blonde-haired German, to 10% of the population of Brazil is of Japanese descent. So you see a lot of those faces as well. And then, of course, Native faces, Hispanic faces, and at the buffets, seeing what you would imagine in terms of South American cuisine, Mesoamerican cuisine, and Italian, Japanese, and German all at the same table. And I thought, how interesting. And the cross-section of people at the conference was every age and every about 50-50 men and women. More often than not, it's more men that I observe at American UFO conferences, equally engaged and taking the subject seriously and snatching the Portuguese and the Spanish translated books from America off the sales tables like crazy, building their libraries. It seems like a much more healthy way to proceed. We don't really have that overall in America, and that's one of the things that we are all engaged in attempting to change.
I totally agree with you, Peter. And as I mentioned previously, I alluded to the fact that this is in the background of the Hispanic culture, this slant toward the spiritual, toward the concept of beings from other planets or other dimensions interacting with us here in this sphere. Even the Roman Catholic Church, which, as you know, is by far the majority church presence in Mexico and South America, they have acknowledged the possibility of life on other planets and have said that this in no way interferes with the doctrines of the church or the teachings of the church. So Hispanics are completely attuned to that. And I've had many people who have pointed out to me that the Bible and the teachings of the church absolutely 100% support the concept of extraterrestrial intelligence elsewhere and do not preclude or exclude the possibility that we have been visited in the past, which we have for many centuries and possibly since near the beginning of our species. So it's an entirely different worldview among the Latino culture. It's entirely, and the joy for me in starting up the Edinburgh conference is that we targeted it to the general population. I mean, you go to a lot of conferences and it's like-minded people.
There you go.
They bounce
Not
around
that there's
from
anything
conference.
wrong with that, but
no,
yes,
there isn't.
This is for me much more potential and frankly much more interesting, engaging for me at this point in my career.
So where I caught the snapshot in Roswell, when they have the events that are targeted to the general population of the city and the visiting families, and that concept was very strong. I wanted to incorporate that into our events.
Well, you did a great job. And NK, would you jump in?
Oh no, she jumped out when you told her to jump in.
Well, I'm not even going to touch that. That's just too weirdly psychic. Not yet, but we are coming up to our on the hour break. And Jane, I'm going to ask you to return, even if it's just for a short number of minutes.
Sure.
We just get a little extra time with you. And we will recover NK in that time. This is such an interesting discussion for me and a number of cross-cultural purposes here. This is Peter Robbins. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. My guests are Noe Torres, Jane Kyle, and NK Kranda. And hopefully coming up in the next hour, Daniel Allen Jones. Stay with us. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Hey members, the new KGRA-DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA-DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA-DB.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA Classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button, so just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
Welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with my guests, Noe Torres, Jane Kyle, and NK Kranda. And we're going to pick up where we left off. But first, I have some photos. And I'd like to begin with one a quick series I'm very proud of. At the actual festival, each one of the speakers had their own table in a long-running tent. And we not only had a good-sized kiosk off to the side with a nice photo of each of us and our compact biographies, but we had our name on the tent. And I thought, this is a first for me. And in the nicest sense of the word, I felt like a very special elephant. I had never had my name on a tent before. So I was very proud of that. And the setup that they gave us was absolutely great. Super professional, everything just so. And again, it started out very low key, in that there were only a few dozen people to start. This is the festival starting late afternoon. And within an hour, there were at least 1,500 very happy people, many of them in costume, enjoying the event with us. Once again, now, Jane, I'm about to reveal a secret about your private life. I hope you don't mind. For me, it is rather earth-shaking.
Oh,
In
no.
fact, you are married to an alien, and he seems like a very nice one. He seems to come from a friendly enough planet. But I fully believe in interspecies dating. Marriage in some cases for sure. But it was wonderful meeting him, and I hope that he stays on this planet with you. A great shot of you. And
I think these are all
over
just me.
here.
We're done with the cool festival photos.
And this is the car that you're driving currently, I assume?
Yes, that's our other car. We tried to keep it a secret, but maybe we're just getting closer to the tipping point, right? The disclosure tipping point.
Well, I think we have more in common than you imagine, because
oh, there we go.
Oh, it's being impounded.
That's amazing.
It was an awkward situation on the edge of Area 51.
Nice.
I got stopped into the little alien for a tuna sandwich, and all of a sudden, they're giving me this issue. A photo by our friend Daniel Allen Jones, who hopefully will be joining us later on in the show. As we know, this is a shot that was taken on the Thursday before the festival and the conference, as we were heading out to the actual crash site. Noe, can you tell us a little bit? You did a wonderful job of presenting the case and the son of the key witness. It was very well done. Can you kind of walk us through the event itself that's behind this whole impetus to create this festival and conference?
As we see the field that you were just showing there, that is the actual place where in 1966 a UFO descended to just very, very low above 8 construction workers who are working at this site. And we believe, although it's not verified, that one of the construction workers fired a weapon at the UFO.
Whoa.
And the UFO responded by shooting a beam of light down at them. They took off running for their lives, and they were all able to make it away from the construction site. But all of the equipment and the RV that they were spending the night in, and their pickup trucks and everything, was completely incinerated in a moment.
Amazing.
And
like the day the earth stood still.
Exactly. And within a short period of time, one of the county deputies at that time, Milo Ponce, showed up at the scene, and he recorded all of this in his report. The following morning, he took his son, Joe Ponce, who is the living witness, who spoke to us and told us the story of his dad's experience. And to this day, Peter, you can find twisted, charred pieces of metal at the site, which we believe are from this incident in 1966.
Yeah.
And you can see the remains of what happened there. So it's an amazing event.
I have to say, I was taken aback, not just because, you stay in this work long enough, as you know, and you like to think you're at least have a general working knowledge of cases that you have not gotten deeply involved in. But this was a revelation to me. And that the reality of, taking it down to the baseline of aggression based on fear of the unknown, because all fear is fear of the unknown. If you, kind of work your way into the center of it, that a weapon is fired and then there is a response. And in this case, the incineration of an awful lot of expensive hardware. Thankfully, no individual was hurt or killed. And then, yet once again, if this had been covered in the major media, the world would have changed at that moment. One can say that about innumerable UFO-related events, but of course, they go the way of all things. For me, one of the most emblematic is in, I think it's August of 1952, a small fleet of unidentified flying objects in formation appeared in the skies over Washington, D.C. We know this. We're familiar with the famous photo. Thousands of people observed it. And yet, aside from a quick flurry in the news over the next couple of weeks, it went away. And it's the ability to influence people's thinking or just re-encourage them, say, it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else. Whatever it is explainable in terms, move along, folks, there's nothing to see here. That this private ranch, which I thought the owner who you introduced us to was very gracious in allowing, the public in to experience this. It's just one more footnote to UFO history, which really is more and more history, not UFO history. And I now
Peter,
consider myself a little more knowledgeable.
I want to add that Mary Moya, the owner of the ranch, has been so wonderful for the past number of years that we've requested to bring groups out to her ranch. The event that we took part in a couple of weeks ago was just the second time that we've invited the public out there.
Oh my.
Normally it's just us, the speakers, and the special guests who go out there and get a chance to walk around.
Yeah.
But this, we did it a few years ago, and it was the most popular part of our festivities for the weekend. And so we decided to do it again for the first time since the pandemic. And it was, as you saw, it was again a very big hit. But Mary Moya, who owns a number of healthcare businesses here in South Texas, purchased this ranch some years ago, and totally unbeknownst to her, but she knew nothing about it until after she purchased it. And then a friend of mine who owns the ranch right next to hers, I worked with for many years in several local school districts, he told me afterwards, I wish I had known, because that ranch was available for purchase and I selected the wrong property. If I had known that this UFO event had happened there, I would have beaten Mary to the punch and would have purchased that property. So now it has generated a lot of interest among the people here, because to own a piece of property where an actual verifiable UFO event occurred.
And hold that thought. We are now joined by our friend and colleague, Daniel Allen Jones. Welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth, my friend.
Hey guys, long time no see, right?
Yeah. I see you're in your studio.
Something like that.
The important thing is that he's wearing the shirt.
Yes, you're not known for being a low-key conservative dresser. Let's face it. Listen, my friend, we've been going on for about an hour or so on UFOs in Texas, the Edinburgh event, the festival, the conference. You have already been announced, so to say. Your introduction has been read into the record, so our viewers and listeners have some sense of who you are. Daniel, let me ask you the question. When did you first become aware of the crash that happened in 1966 at that ranch in Edinburgh? And how long have you been involved in the event itself?
Great. It's, I think, a really important part of why we're able to continue having something like this going on in Texas without knowing everything. And I think he was probably the primary reason I became aware of this. And I say that because it may be that in some way I came across it at one point, maybe from 2011 to 2013 or 14, without realizing its reference to anyone. But it was in 2015 that I met up with Noe and got to meet him, not in Edinburgh, but in Del Rio, Texas, at another very similar event we used to have out there.
Yes, he's discussed that a bit.
Got shut down, unfortunately. But he discussed there will be more, because there was a whole series of events called the Border Zone UFO Festival, which he helped put together. And that was something I think was really cool to see, when in its relation to all of the places that had something relevant, like a crash site. And so it was later that year that I got to come out and meet him there in his hometown there in Edinburgh, Texas, where we got to discuss that crash case in much more detail. And so I would say in 2015, which is, pretty late in the game, in some sense, that anyone, I think, probably at this point either has heard about it through Noe's involvement and through something that the event has probably, brought awareness to at this point. But he's how I found out about it. And I think that it's great that the city can be involved in the capacity. I heard a little bit as I was coming in, what you guys were discussing about the ranch. And of course, Noe had mentioned the owners. And it's so awesome to see that it's being handled this way, and that under this kind of management, they're excited about this. They're not the complete opposite and saying, never come back. We don't want anything to do with it, which could very well have been the case in any situation with this topic. And so it's really nice that they're able to allow us to come out there. I got to go out to that, and also another private visitation there on the ranch with Noe and a number of other guests, that we did a private field investigation where we had some of the other members scanning and getting some data on that metal that we saw. And it's really important to think about what that could at least give us an idea about now, all this time later, what we're trying to think about had happened to those guys in a way that we don't have any of their witness testimony other than them coming and calling the authorities, which we know, and of course, as Noe's probably mentioned, and everyone else as well, Joe Ponce coming in as a boy, seeing the site, I think is one of the greatest parts of this whole story, is that he's still around. We don't know what's going on with those construction workers, and unfortunately, they may have incurred something similar to maybe in the relation to like the Cash Landrum case, where you had people radiated. Got anything?
I love the Cash Landrum case. That's actually where I met Daniel. And I have a horticulture degree, and I know several lumberjacks and things like that. And they've torn up and repaved that road 6 or 7 times, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things, is it's hard to go back to some of these court cases and find things tangible.
Well, yeah, because people keep trying to take soil samples and asphalt samples of the radioactive activity. And I said, a lot of these pine trees are over 50, 70, 100 years old. I'm like, you could put on a vest and climb up there and drill into the cambium, and then you can see from the rings on the trees which years had radiation and deviated growth.
Wow.
And then they all kind of just stared at me, and I don't think anybody did it. So maybe it'll be me.
I want to go to a different line of questioning briefly. And Jane, I'm going to begin with you, because I know previous obligations are going to take you away from us fairly soon. It's understandable. Birthday parties for children are priority, and
number one.
the cost of blowing this is too much to contemplate. So the world of UFOs comes second in this case. How did you first become interested in this subject, and about what age were you?
Well, so I'm not the person who has seen UFOs or grew up hearing about them or reading about them or grew up in a military family. What's interesting though is, like, I really was a deep thinker growing up. Like, I remember literally just sitting in my room just thinking about things. So I thought about a lot of weird stuff. And I remember even being aware of that. But first, I never went down the UFO path though. Like, I never went down aliens visiting for some reason, which is, even though I liked movies too, it's not like I didn't have an imagination for it. So it wasn't until after college I started dating a guy who would then become my husband, who he knew everything, that we all kind of know now.
We're talking about this guy.
Well, so be it, maybe, I don't know, what's the disguise, the alien or the human disguise? I don't know what's what. I don't know what's what anymore. But yeah, so it was just kind of osmosis, and then so once you find out, man, this is real, you can't go back. And so I had a journalism degree, I had writing experience, I was doing other types of writing, movie reviews, even fashion critiques, all kinds of stuff. And so I was like, oh man, I got to document UFOs. So one thing led to another, and now, I've still been doing it about 10 years later. So Texas UFO Sightings was set up in 2012, when I really officially decided to focus on this stuff. But yeah, I have to run. I have to run, guys, for the kiddo. So I'd be doing more UFO research, if it wasn't for the kiddo. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful to have
Before Jane goes,
right?
I just want to pop in here and say that she and I are both graduates of the University of Texas at Austin. Go Longhorns.
Yep.
And Jane, thank you so much for being with us today.
I would also say, as is my niece, who graduated from University of Texas, Austin, with her doctorate in English literature. So yes, go
outstanding.
Cool. Very cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Please send our love to those two special guys in your life, and we'll see you around the campus.
All right. Bye.
NK, how did you first become interested in UFOs and what we'll call the paranormal or non-standard subjects?
So many people have tried to pin me down on this question, and I seem to keep escaping, except it's you. The first experience I can remember is with a marble. But I think before that, when I was young, my parents had taped a Betamax tape over a television show, which was called Flight of the Navigator.
Oh my.
And it's about a little boy that goes on a ship and he travels through time and dimensions, and they play the Beach Boys and all kinds of stuff, and he's supposed to be the navigator, and it's this great movie. And I don't have much memory of when I was very, very little. So my sisters told me, like, yeah, you would watch that movie literally 3 times a day if we let you. So I thought that was pretty interesting, because that's something that I didn't remember, that, Flight of the Navigator was very much in my subconscious, and it's something I used to watch constantly. And that the aliens were, benign, and they wanted to help you, and they wanted you to get home and things like that. And, the dangerous people in that movie were the humans and the government. So other than that, I've written the marble story several times. Long story short, I was a young kid sitting in a church, very, very long, straight, level conference table, and I was just flicking a marble, and I would run across the other side and I would grab it. And gradually it started making figure eights, and it started playing with me and just making different weird designs, which I knew as a little kid wasn't possible the way I was rolling it. So finally I was like, you know what, I've had enough. My 7 or 8 year old logic does not accept this. And I just really shot that marble across the table, like, get out of here, get out of my life. And it stopped completely, and it did a figure 8 infinity motion right back to my hand.
And when did you first become interested in the subject of unidentified flying objects?
Honestly, it was MUFON. Is that I had become very interested in missing 411 and David Paulides and ley lines and why people were going missing. And I noticed that he was very integrated with, MUFON and the symposium, and he was one of their best speakers. And I read all of his books, and they were amazing. And like, he will actually answer your emails if you write to him, which is amazing as a person that wants to talk to an author. So I joined a MUFON chapter, and then unfortunately, although I worked with great people, it just wasn't the best chapter. We didn't have the best people. We didn't have the best budget. And I kind of thought to myself, I was like, well, I can do all the work that I'm doing here way better and with way more ethics by myself than trying to be attached to this other organization that wants all of my notes and all of my reports and money and everything else. And so I did, and I've been running with it ever since. And I'm writing some books about it.
Daniel, when and under what circumstances and about how old were you when the subject of unidentified flying objects and all it incorporates first came into your consciousness?
Yeah, I would say growing up as a kid and just with how involved it was in the media, or just multimedia and pop culture, it was sort of normalized, the idea of aliens and even other strange creatures, all of that stuff. And I'm really interested in all those things now in a completely different way. But back then, it was just more of a fun idea or something. And I would say that even though I have my own experiences, I really don't find a lot of those things a big springboard into my involvement. It was later on when I actually went through a lot of my own personal transformation, I guess out of adolescence. And I would say around the time I was about 20 years old, or even before that, when I was a teenager in high school, I remember frequenting some websites like Above Top Secret, and came across one weird website about something called the Wing Makers, which is kind of just these fun stories and ideas that people have posted and talked about. But the real way I think I got involved in a more serious approach, I started collecting books. Something that caught my attention was, of course, at the time, the local Stephenville UFO, which is not too far from where I live. And at that time, it wasn't maybe but a year later, I found myself reading a lot of just different literature on the subject. And one notably was by an author with the name of Jim Mars. And I thought, this guy really has a good, strong approach with integrity when it comes to investigative journalism. I like this. He's not very sensational, but he'll stick to what he can. And I liked that idea when it came to something that seemed very lofty, when it's like the Wild West and anything goes, and it kind of still is. But I think that it's important to see like that people have tried to approach this in a way that we can try to find some way to verify a lot of these challenging claims, which are exciting and incredible, but we have a lot more to try to work with to not just convince people. But I thought Jim did a good job of keeping these level-headed. So I thought this would be a cool person to meet, because at that time YouTube had only been out for, and people were starting to upload patients people would get. I thought, wow, that's about this. That's amazing. And at the time, I was so naive. I didn't know anything about MUFON or anything, up until like studying and investigating, certain things about Stephen and all these other cases. I found out, okay, there's a meeting. Jim's going to give a talk at this group in Dallas, and this was in 2010. So I thought I'll go meet him, listen to this lecture, and maybe meet with like-minded. I finally reach out and connect with other people. We're trying to understand all of this. Know anyone that did. It wasn't something. But I met him at that meeting. At the time, I asked people in that group, I think a professor called MUFON, or no, that had just happened, just like a year earlier, and they kind of laughed and they're like, "Oh, okay, I didn't realize, but that was MUFON for the same people." The chair of MUFON at the time, and for that case, was asked to leave MUFON, and he formed his own, which was this group, and I got involved with that for a few years, and worked with Jim on events and got connected. He introduced me to a lot of, and then from there, it's kind of evolved into the work that I do, and pay tribute in many ways to Jim, that encouragement, because I think that with his encouragement throughout this journey, been able to at least have a lot of opportunities. All of you, thanks to him.
Got it.
I blame Earl Grey Anderson for everything. So if you hate me, as a ufologist or anyone else, it's all his fault. He dragged me into the field kicking and screaming. So sorry, Space Dad, but I'm throwing you under the bus.
Well, one of my favorite people in the field.
He's
Earl
so
Grey
amazing.
Anderson,
oh my God.
who usually drops his last name and just goes by Earl Grey.
Yes, he goes by Earl Grey. He plays the guitar. He wears the Birkenstocks. It's amazing. And he's one of the best experiencer research team people I have ever met. He is one of my other mentors. I've got to be present while he's interviewed other people. So you know how Hynek had the pipe? Earl had his own herbological mixture and was just very calmly smoking while he's interviewing this witness, and it was an amazing interview, and he handled it so calmly, and as a human and as an empath, he said everything just right, and I was like, wow.
Noe, I know, like me, you're not just a reader from when you're young, but you're also a book lover. And as I said at the beginning, you chose a career as a professional librarian, which I have tremendous respect and almost a little bit of jealousy for. In growing up, was your interest in UFOs and the paranormal sparked by an experience, by a sighting, or intellectual curiosity and reading? And when did it really take hold?
My mom had an encounter in 1943, 1944 timeframe.
Whoa.
At our family residence at that time. I wasn't born for over a decade later, but my mom and dad were living in a small frame home that was basically surrounded by woods, and she heard loud noises and saw flashing lights outside the window out toward the backyard in the middle of the night. And she left my older brothers asleep in their beds, and she walked out there. And before she knew it, there was a hovering object directly above her head. My family had several dogs, and they were all circling her, jumping up several feet into the air and snapping their jaws at whatever was above her head. She saw lights all around her. The trees around her were swaying as if from strong winds, and a loud commotion. And she didn't remember how long this went on. And finally, I remember distinctly, she described it as if somebody had suddenly turned a light switch off. Everything grew still. The dogs were completely quiet, and they came down and settled down beside her. But during this entire incident, she said her neck muscles were frozen and she could not look up to see what it was above her head. All she could hear was the noise, the commotion, the lights, the wind, the rushing of the wind and the trees around her. So this incredible incident that she told me about led me to go out and seek more information about the UFO encounters that were going on in that time period, and introduced me to authors like John Keel, Brad Steiger, and many others, which, by the way, I hadn't shared the story of my mom's experience with many people. I don't know if I'm able to share this book cover. Let me see if it will allow me to.
Is it one of your books?
No, it's a book by my friend, the late Brad Steiger.
Yes, a lovely man and a prolific and important writer.
Well, anyway, I'm not able to share it apparently, but he insisted on, in 2013, he wrote a book called Real Encounters, Different Dimensions, and Otherworldly Beings. And Brad co-wrote that with his wife, Sherry. And he contacted me because he had heard me tell just a brief snippet of my mom's story during a radio interview. So he wanted to include it in his book, and he insisted on it. So I sent him some historical photographs of my mom and the place where it happened. I went through my old pictures, and so I was able to get some fairly representative photographs of that time period that my parents had taken, and he was really happy. So he did a chapter on my mom's encounter in his 2013 book, which I think was one of the last ones he put out prior to his passing.
I have to say, I'm always interested how people became involved in the subject. And I've had a number of people respond by telling me it was their parent one of their parents, or in some cases grandparents, who got them involved. I have never heard an account quite like that. Do you remember about how old you were when your mother first shared that story with you?
I would say between 10 and 12 years old.
Wow.
And people, sometimes people say, well, she was just trying to frighten you a little bit and keep you from wandering out into the woods late at night. And I said, no, that wasn't it at all. The way she said it to me, she was still, after all those years, trying to puzzle out what it was that had happened to her. She was deeply disturbed by it and still couldn't come to grips with it. And she kept trying to for the rest of her life.
I have to say, let me ask you, there are people who are hugely important in the work, including Stanton Friedman, who I may have had a sighting toward the end of his life, I forget. Timothy Good, arguably the most well-known, highly regarded UFO researcher and author in the United Kingdom for decades, who never had a sighting but became involved for the great intellectual curiosity that they had. Have you ever had a UFO sighting?
Other than lights in the night sky that did not seem to follow conventional aircraft trajectories, which I have seen a few of those as far back as the late 60s. But no, I have not had an up close and personal encounter of any kind. I've spent, as you know, a lot of time talking to firsthand witnesses, though, and I've heard very impressive stories. So I started writing my books from a journalistic point of view. Like, let's hear what folks who have actually had these experiences, what they have to say.
Yep.
And my interest continued to grow from that.
And we're going to go through some of your books shortly. Daniel, have you ever had an actual UFO sighting, or your engagement is still purely from a highly intellectually curious point of view?
Well, I like to often say that other than maybe a few strange experiences here and there that aren't things that I could really pinpoint as being like an articulated craft, and much like Noe said, nothing that other than strange lights I would make a case out of. But in a similar way, just connecting with many people who do have very interesting accounts has led me to wonder about many different aspects of not just the sightings of objects, but other situations which, like NK was saying earlier, other experiences that might be more other than just seeing something in the sky, something more maybe what we consider paranormal or something like this. So I would say that other than seeing the Marfa lights on a few occasions and other strange mystery lights, I wouldn't say that I've seen like any particular like disc or daylight discs or any kind of shaped craft that I thought that's not normal, and so I have seen some mysterious black helicopters on a few occasions, and I don't know that means anything, but I hope not. But either way, I think that it's hard. It'll be continually harder with Starlink, with the advances in drone technology, all of these things. And offering a page where people can report things that's one of the other challenges, is that you'll get a lot of noise and try to make sense of that. So it's something that I like Noe approached also in like a more journalistic approach as far as trying to gather data and really build an ethnography and study this as an anthropologist as well, not just the phenomenon, but maybe the people, how they operate, their beliefs, their practices, their thoughts. So that's interested me, and I think that my experiences and all these other things have been interesting as well. But I do think that it's possible I've seen something, but nothing like really notable that I would try to make a case out of.
That's awesome. I actually have a question for Peter if he wants to take one.
Sure.
Because Peter began in this as an investigative journalist and has gradually become more and more empathetic to the experiencer crowd, that he's become more like me, like an advocate for that sort of group of people. And I'm kind of wondering what inspired your change from I'm a person, I'm a reporter, I'm here, I'm writing this book to, it's 1 o'clock in the morning and you're taking a private message from a stranger saying, look, I just really need someone to talk to.
Good question. First, I would have to say, I think of myself as an investigative writer. That word journalist, I leave to people that have actually studied journalism. I am self-taught. I grew up in a family where my mother in particular kind of implanted my sisters and I the understanding that while you follow your dreams, you should be of service to others in your community or beyond.
Yeah.
And in some level of volunteer work or just being out there in the world and trying to leave things a little better than you find them. In that spirit, my mom had worked for a year as a crisis intervention volunteer for an organization rooted in the UK called Samaritans International that has walk-in centers around what we used to call the Commonwealth countries and a few centers telephone in only in the States. And after a year, she left to basically work with AIDS patients at nearby Roosevelt Hospital. They lived in Midtown Manhattan. And she said, you should take this training. You'd be good at it. You've got a natural inclination for being there for people. And it would be something you could apply in later life. The usual burnout rate was about a year. I stayed for 8 years with some very necessary breaks.
Of course you did.
The busiest suicide hotline in the United States. It gave me a very good basic lay training in dealing with people in crisis and in, maybe more important, being a good listener. But I'm a humanist above all else. I care about people.
Hold on. Let's stop for a second. So thank you so much for volunteering and doing that work and being there for people and convincing them to keep going and being there for them at the end. I don't think that you get enough attention about what you used to do. A lot of people focus on ufology, but you're an amazing humanitarian. You've helped a lot of these people talk through horrific pain and suicide and loss, and just gave them a reason to keep going, even if it was a cup of tea or if it was a song or if it was hey, there's always tomorrow, you can wait. But yeah, I think that's the last ring I'm going to shoot in on Peter Robbins, because I have to make sure that I have to make my daughter is not burning down this house. This is not mine. This is another person's house. And I have to go check on her because Peter and Daniel both know what she's capable of. And if they want to tell that story about her pushing me into the pool, they can.
Yeah. Before we do, I became involved in the UFO field. I won't even say overnight, but in a matter of a minute and a half or so.
Yeah.
Many years ago, when my sister Helen told me a series of very conscious memories about her abduction experience. So that was my first passionate interest in the field. And within a year or so, I'd linked up with another artist, which is how I began my professional career, who had also become interested in the work about 5 years.
Yeah. We all know Bud Hopkins. We know.
Yeah, before he published his first UFO book. And I worked as his assistant for many years. So it was kind of a natural follow-up to just stay available to people who needed somebody to basically listen and know that no matter what else, they would treat them with respect and take the potential of what they were saying seriously. That said, on the Sunday following the conference, Noe, when you were having some much needed rest and relaxation at home, myself and NK and Daniel and Jane and her husband Ben were relaxing at the pool at the Holiday Inn when this little bit of a cute 7-year-old who looks like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth pushed her mother into the swimming pool with her mother's phone. And that caused some consternation and possibly dire consequences to mother and phone and daughter, who immediately ran to me seeking protection and got rightly whacked with a giant pool noodle several times by a mother, while Jane's husband was cleaning out every bit of water from that phone. And whatever the brand is, we can highly encourage it because that phone is still working. Not UFO related, but a plug for.
I'm so sorry I missed that in real time.
Oh no, it gets even better. Is that I tried to
Anybody
open my
film it?
umbrella
It was
about a minute later.
precious.
No,
And
but
I almost became Mary Poppins and catapulted myself back into the pool. So it was just a really great day of physical comedy. But first of all, Peter, I love that you're a humanitarian. I love how your talk included Russia, and it included talk about the conscripts and the people were there. And that really meant a lot to me. I know I only got to post a teaser of your talk, but there are literally hundreds of people that have been bugging me about where the rest of your talk is. So you're going to need to come forward about that eventually.
Oh, actually, yes, good question. Noe, I know that the presentations that were done were not professionally recorded for use by the conference, although I would highly encourage that. Is there any way, Noe or Daniel, that listeners and viewers can watch even a home shot version of any of the presentations, mine included, that were given at the Saturday conference 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, whatever.
I did send you a link to all the lectures, Peter. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but they're all on YouTube.
Send me the link and I'll fix it.
And do you know
they're unfixable, but you can hear them very well and see the slides very well.
I know, it's just that my introduction was so perfect and so well written and well rehearsed. I really want to relive that with Peter Robbins.
Somebody had tripped over the cord. Somebody had tripped over the cord to my camcorder, and so we missed the first 5 minutes or so of Peter's talk and your introduction, unfortunately. But I'm sure Daniel probably got it.
Oh, great! Thank you, Daniel.
I have, especially knowing.
If somebody doesn't have the link right now, is there a way to describe how they go on YouTube and what they should put in to access the Edinburgh talks?
Geez.
Looks great.
May not be.
That's your channel, Noe's Roswell.
Yeah, if you go to roswellbooks.com, which is I think on the screen here, and then there's a menu on the right that has my YouTube. It says my YouTube videos or something like that. Then that will show all the videos. Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I completely and utterly adore and respect you all. Unfortunately, I have to go. It's been so wonderful being on Peter's show again, and to see you, Mr. Noe. Thank you so much, you and Daniel, for letting me introduce Peter. That was like one of the best, most emotional, positive moments of my life. And I'm pretty sure I stuttered a couple times because I was just getting so emotional that I got to introduce Peter Robbins. Oh my God. But thank you again. Edinburgh was fantastic. I got invited to go back next year. Definitely come see me, come see Daniel, come see Noe, come see Peter Robbins. And I have to go find my 7-year-old now.
Continue the legacy.
Love you guys. Find me on Facebook as NK Kranda. I gotta go.
Bye for now.
Yeah.
Noe, I want to quickly go through some of your books, not in the order they were published. I read your book on Roswell, which I found, as I mentioned parenthetically, I think it's the best book to visit Roswell with as a student of the subject, as a tourist, as somebody who's just generally interested in this extraordinary story and the place, because it takes you to the actual locations where these historic people lived, where events happened. It's just a brilliant guidebook. And your work
that book actually came about due to my own wanting to know where all this happened. And this will not surprise you at all, but when we spoke at the UFO Museum, we were not allowed to leave the area. And I was just dying to go out around town, visit the old Roswell
Yeah,
Army Air Base. I
totally.
wanted to go out to the Foster Ranch where the crash happened.
Exactly.
And I was just like
It was in
stifled.
our
And
contracts. We had
it
to
was
be on
written.
premises.
We had to stay there. We could not take part in any media interviews
Couldn't
unless
go
they
out
were
and see the
recorded.
parade. I mean,
So,
that policy is softened considerably.
so finally, I slowly over the course of years, I compiled my own guide to where all the events of the Roswell UFO incident happened, and that resulted in this book. And it was my own searching for the story of Roswell in terms of the real places where it happened. Hangar 84,
Exactly.
where the alien autopsy was conducted. Jesse Marcel's residence and his former office where he, took part in the Roswell case. So this book was actually my own exploration into all of that.
It's the best kind of drive mechanism any writer can have. Your own curiosity fleshed out in information that you have pulled up because of your genuine interest in the subject. Hangar 84, remind me, is that the remaining hangar that still stands there?
It is, and it's being used as a place where they disassemble aircraft for parts and then sell them to the third party markets.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've been in there and we've looked around.
Oh yeah.
They have a little secret room they call the gray room.
No
and
pun intended.
Supposedly that's where the bodies were held back in 47.
The city still owns the facility, but they lease it to this aircraft company to do what you're talking about.
Yes.
When you fly into Roswell, there is a site that for me is reminiscent of something one would have seen at different locations, primarily around the Southwest in the early post-war years, where fighter aircraft and bombers that were now basically derelict were lined up as far as the eye could see, and one by one being cannibalized for, the metal or the parts.
Exactly.
There is a scene at the end of one of my all-time favorite American films, which was my father's favorite film. I'll think of it in a moment. It involves the return of three veterans, a William Wyler film, The Best Days of Our Lives, and where Dana Andrews, in his finest performance as a bomber, is climbed up into one of these old cockpits and is reliving what's going on in his mind. And when you fly in over Roswell, if you look at the right point as you're coming in, you will see something similar. I remember it's got to be a dozen years or so ago when the hangar was clear and was not in that use yet. And we had a huge cocktail party, for lack of a better term. German television was there. They had some props actually from Close Encounters. And what struck me the most was this building. It should be there should be a brass plaque on it, not just for the controversial reason that it is alleged to have housed the wreckage and the bodies recovered from the Roswell crash, but because in August of 1945, a scant 2 years minus earlier, a aircraft called the Enola Gay took off. I think stopped in California, stopped in one of the atolls to have something called the device attached, and then went on to drop the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. That began in Hangar 84, that mission. And it's been ignored as a national landmark.
It has.
A controversial one. My hope is that at some point in the future, that when the lease is up, that the city is savvy enough to not renew it and to make it a dedicated historic facility.
The real shame in this, Peter, is that slowly the landmarks related to the Roswell UFO incident are being demolished.
Yep.
They're being
Most of them are
obliterated.
gone. Yep.
Several of the places that I feature in my book have been destroyed, have been eliminated, and so I had to go back and write that they no longer exist, but this is what they used to look like. You can stand in the place where they were, but they're no longer there. Now, this is, the Roswell incident continues to be probably the most significant thing about Roswell, New Mexico, and yet the leadership of the city has done nothing to try to preserve these places. You know that. You've been through that whole
Not since
thing.
Mayor Sam was in office. He shared a vision with me that this should become an international tourist destination, and that the city should be networking with tour agents around the world to bring in junkets of people, to train a special cadre of guides, in great part now using your book. But we've had a succession of mayors there who may be very good administrators and good for the city in other areas, but who have really ignored, is a kind word, for what's happened here. It's one of the reasons why I so appreciate what's going on in Edinburgh and in Exeter, New Hampshire, and McMinnville, Oregon, and Pine Bush, New York, which is such a small hamlet. And I should say here, why Pine Bush, New York? Because it has the highest incidence of documented credible sightings and non-standard events anywhere in the Northeast. It's such a small hamlet that the growing festival and conference is held one town over, which probably has 5,000 people. But these events are important for promoting the reality of the UFO phenomena, for doing it in a way that is family and child friendly, and at the same time offering what I consider hard educational opportunities for attending these conferences, which we do see more and more young people at. I think this is a parental decision, depending on the kind of lecture. But I am all for. I am such a rooter and fan of these conferences at this point, with these festivals attached.
Peter, Daniel and I had an immense vision to bring to fruition a festival and conference at Aurora, Texas, which is the site of the famous 1897 crash of an object in the middle of town, from which an alien body was recovered. It was reported throughout the media that an inhabitant not of this earth was recovered from the wreckage of that ship, and it was subsequently given a proper Christian burial in the town cemetery, where you can still go today and see the grave of the spaceman. So Daniel, I know in our association with Jim, the late great Jim Mars, and
yes, a friend of all of ours.
And we tried to get something going there, but unfortunately, as I just briefly alluded to, the town does not have the infrastructure, the resources to continue that forward. And Daniel, I know that recent developments in the town, unfortunately, have set us even further back, but I know it would be awesome to have a festival, perhaps involving some of the other surrounding towns there at some point in the future.
And believe it or not, I'm going to have to hold you there. I do want to mention in closing, and special thanks to you guys and to Jane and NK for joining us on this show, that in the 1980s, a very poignant film, modest budget, I think it was called The Aurora Incident, correct me if I'm wrong, which I was terribly moved by, and I'll bet you can find on YouTube. But with that understood, and we could certainly do ongoing shows on the UFO phenomena in Texas, and maybe we will. This is Peter Robbins, and Meanwhile Here on Earth, thanking you for watching and listening, reminding you to stay well, fight for what you believe in, and be kind to each other. And see you next week.